let me do this way. I will introduce myself and I will ask Dr. Blaauw also to introduce, and I will go ahead and give my talk. It will be close to 20 minutes, I guess. And after that, Dr. Blaauw will continue and he will talk about the pest and also another invasive problem that we have in our state. So let's plan like that. Is that good?
That sounds great. Perfect.
Wonderful, wonderful. So my name is Shimat Joseph, and I am in UGA Griffin campus, and I'm an entomologist working in turf and ornamentals. So my primary responsibility is turf and ornamentals entomology. So I work with several pest issues in these two commodities in various systems. That includes, like, say, turf grass. We have sod farms, we have golf courses, residential settings, and also commercial settings. So I work on all those settings, and also in nursery and landscape management aspect too. So work on very broad area, but turf and ornaments kind of my area. And the point of today's presentation is that we recently have a detection of an invasive insect in our state, and we saw that in the beginning last year, but was just one individual insect that we caught, and was not sure it's too early to make an announcement or make a big announcement on that, but we did that last year too. But this year we found more, so it's worthwhile to mention that and give the kind of give you an overview of this pest that we found recently. Brett, please introduce yourself.
All right, thank you, Shimat, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a great turnout, impressive. To hear about two invasive species. So, sorry, I'm Brett Blaauw. I am the peach entomologist at the University of Georgia. I'm located on the Athens campus, and part of my specialty is one working with peaches, but also a variety of other fruit crops, including apples and grapes. And like Shimat, I am an entomologist, so I'm studying the insects that interact with these crops across the state. And when we get new invasive species, that can become a big concern because it can often impact our industries and our commodities. And so I get to work with the growers, I get to work with extension personnel, as well as the master gardeners. And so we're here today to talk about these pests to kind of give you guys a heads up that when you're out there working, maybe there's some insects that you can keep an eye out for. So we'll turn it back to Shimat to start the introduction into our pests, and then you'll hear from me in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Brett. Okay, I hope you all can see this. Okay, right, we are good to go, right? You all can see it? Great. Give me 1 second.
Yes, we're good to go.
Wonderful. So this pest is called, I don't know, multiple names, but what we kind of start saying is brown winged planthopper. And it's, as you can see the picture here, it looks like a moth, right? Moths are not like butterflies. They have a pink wing pattern. They keep their wings kind of a roof-like, right? They put a roof-like on the back. And that's how this insect is also kind of pretty, keeping resting their wings. So it's not a moth, okay? It's not a lepidoptera, not a moth. It is a plant hopper. So moths and plant hoppers have different they're different two buckets in our when we group them. Um, Moths have as a siphoning type moth part, and in this case plant hoppers, they have chewing moth and not chewing, sorry, straw-like moth part, piercing and sucking. That's what we call it. So it's basically a straw, and inside that straw they have needles, and they arrange these needles in a such a way that they secrete saliva into the plant tissue when they poke the plant, and they ingest the sap. After that, pre-orally kind of digest all this, the material, they suck it up, and that's how they feed. And that process, sometimes they put the mouth part into the xylem tissue, that's where the water moves, or sometimes into the phloem tissue, that is where the food moves from the all the photosynthetes, right? The leaves produce, they kind of distribute through the phloem tissue all the way to roots in those direction. So they basically put their mouth part in there. It's kind of a straw at that point, they just suck it. And they it's kind of once they're in there, it's kind of there for a while. And in that process, they just eat whatever they can, those material that mostly sugars that comes out, right? And they feed on that, and they feed because they don't have a control on what how much they feed. They basically secrete the excess sugars and all from their body, and that where they're deposited on the leaf tissue, and that produces kind of thin layer on the leaf tissue, and where the fungus, the one black sooty mold fungus that grows on it. Anyway, I'll show. I don't have pictures for all those things, so just to give an introduction on the pest itself and the way they feed, because that's very important for to know about the plant hoppers. Okay, just introduction into and what we do and how I disseminate information is one of this channel that you have. Brett also has different channels for apples and peaches, but for ornamentals we have this. We call it of ornamental pest management, and where you can sign up. And when we write articles, and we write articles on invasive pests, on existing emerging problems and things like that, and you will get an email. That's all. And we won't write like every week, and you won't clutter your mailbox. But important information. That's the way we disseminate. And I would encourage you all to sign up for this. And you can see on the corner here, and you can use this QR code to open up in your browser, so you can sign up. And there is a lot of resources like turfgrass pest and landscape pest and all those things there that you can go and take a look. And that's basically biology, general management, not into the pesticide use, because that you had to consult with the county agents, because they are going to use the Georgia Pest Management Handbook that has recommendations in there. That's basically used and to interact with you all and give you recommendations when you have an issue. Okay, so I encourage you to go and sign up for this. Okay. Okay. Now back to the insect pest. Okay. So this plant hopper I was saying has a sucking mouthpart, and the scientific name that we have is Pochasia shantungensis. That's what it's called, and it's originating from China. So it's native to China, and around about 2010 is basically moved out of China. In our state, we start seeing them, like I already mentioned, like we saw last year in sometime in July. There's just basically one individual that was caught based on a photo somebody posted in iNaturalist, and the Department of Ag went there and verified it, and they got the one individual. They sent out to USDA lab to confirm what that is, species identity of that, and confirmed as an invasive, not reported in the country, not just Georgia, in the country. So then, we had a meeting, and Brett and I was involved in those meetings. And we said, okay, maybe it's an accident. It's just one thing. We're not sure it's established. We may not need to be, set any alarm mode at this point. But still, we need to let people know to look for. And that's we did. And Department of Ag, and we all put together a kind of fact sheet, and that's all there. That's very informative fact sheet that you can take a look. Well, following that July episode, we still saw masses, and again, we are not sure whether this masses is related to this new species, and USDA confirmed it is. And then things are getting kind of serious now, right? You start seeing masses, and this year we also found nymphs, and again confirmed with USDA with the DNA barcoding type work to make sure it is the same species. And we confirmed that it's there, and we saw nymphs. And not only just one site, we also saw that in another site that's about 4 miles away. Again, all this work was, legwork was done by Department of Ag, and we are so thankful that they did all this work and alerted us about the new pest situation that kind of brewing in our state. So this detection we found in Atlanta area, most in Gwinnett County. That's what we found this problem. Okay. Um, so I was saying that it's originated in China, and in I think 2009, 2010, it basically moved to South Korea, and it's stayed there for some time and caused a lot of issues in those states, especially on tree fruits. Brett is going to talk about that in a little while. I'm not going to talk more on that. So it caused issues and economic problems, right? And at the same time, it also showed up in Turkey and other European countries. So that's how it's kind of spread. Now it is kind of reported from 13 non-native or countries, mostly Europe and also in Asia, in Japan, also in South Korea at this moment. And we have it in USL also now. So this is how the adult look like. I know there is two views. As you can see, they are very small plant hopper, not big size. I don't know you guys are familiar with spotted lanternfly. That is another one, and I think Brett is going to talk about that. Invasive, that is a little bigger in size. Compared to that, these are smaller in size. As you can see, it's less than 1 centimeter. They are very small, but they are very unique because they look like moth-like look, brownish. It's very difficult to miss. If they're there on the leaf, you'll see it. Okay. Adults can live up to 2 to 4 weeks, and females are slightly bigger in size, especially when they have gravid eggs, in their abdomen. They are apparently a little bit bigger in size, but more or less same size, I would say. And they have the eyes are brownish red in color, as you can see in this picture. And again, brownish, yellowish brownish is basically their tone. If you look at the forewing of this insect, that's the first pair of wings, you will see two white spots. You can see over here, two white spots, and that's kind of a unique identity for this pest. Okay, it's just showing the male and female here upside down. As you can see, in the gravid females, as they have their eggs developed, their abdomen expands, and you see some yellow striations that appears in their abdomen. Okay, abdominal segments kind of expands a little bit when they have eggs developing inside there. Egg masses. So they lay eggs in masses. It's not like laying eggs individually. They lay eggs in masses, and they deposit those eggs in the twigs and branches of the trees. And that's very interesting, right? And if you look at this is kind of an egg mass. And what they do is the female basically drill kind of a trench, and it's kind of drill a trench and tuck the eggs in those trench. So it kind of protecting it, from elements like sunlight or weather, temperature, whatever that may be, or predators. So basically do that, and they put this kind of cottony, kind of white waxy filaments on that, and that's what we see egg masses wise. And they lay about in 2 rows, typically, sometimes one row. In one row, we'll have about 5 to 35 eggs. So with 2 rows, close to 70 eggs, but that's what we typically see with egg masses. So they lay eggs in masses on the twigs and branches of trees. And this also will talk about damage, but this basically contribute towards damage as well. So the way they lay eggs and also is very important to know. So a few pictures about how they lay eggs, and you can see on the branches, like 5 white, cottony, fuzzy looking appearances will have. Might suspect maybe it's some fungus growing and things like that. It's not fungus, it's egg masses here. So in our system, where we know already that they all winter as eggs. So egg masses, basically, that's what they're all winter. And eggs hatch, we start seeing in April. That's what we saw in our state. And a female can lay up to 150 eggs for a duration of 2 to 3 weeks. And literature says in China that there is two peaks of egg production, egg laying. That's one in June, July timeframe, another one is in September, October. That's in China, but in our case, we exactly don't know. So we think that will be around about that time frame, but not exactly the one I'm saying here. Okay. Nymphs. So they're true bugs, right? So they don't have a stage called pupae. So they don't have pupal stage. So they grow, eggs hatch and they go different nymphal instars and they molt into adult. There is no pupae for this creature. So for the true bugs, in this case, we have 5 instars. So there are 5 stages of development. Insects are very different from others where they don't grow. They grow gradually, but we won't see that, right? They grow internally in their shell, and at some point when they become bigger in size, they shed that skin, and suddenly they become big. And when they do that 5 times, and we call it like instars. That's the way we call it. That's the way insects grow, and they become adults. Same thing. Magically, they become adult when they molt. So they grow inside that shell or exoskeleton, we call it, that's inside internally, and they shed as they grow. So they are 5 stars, and they say that they have 2 to 3 months it takes for them to mature, for all the nymphs to adult. Again, all these things can be different in our state. We don't know anything about this. This is all information we gather from like pile of papers that you see here in the bottom. All the papers, what they found in South Korea and also in Japan, also in China. That's what we basically got this information from. Okay, so physically they look mostly whitish, yellowish, creamy color, with some brown patches, and there are a few dots in their thorax we saw. And again, they are very tiny, and as they grow, the size also increases from like 1.19 millimeter to about 3 millimeters. So they are very small creatures. What is really interesting to see is that it looks like a fuzzy, cottony spots on the leaves. So basically, they produce a cluster of white waxy filaments in the abdomen. As you can see here, that gives this appearance. And this waxy appearance, and that basically comes from their abdomen. And sometimes they shoots up all the way, sometimes all the different directions, as you can see on these pictures. Okay, that's why I have a few more pictures to show how the nymphs look, so that you can have a sense of that. This is one of those. That's basically stole the pictures from internet actually, because we don't have all those pictures in our leisure here from our state. So you can see the other pictures from another manuscript, and you can see all the different kinds or different variety, because they're all different stages, and even in the same stage, there are coloration can be subtle differences in coloration and how they spread out those white filaments is also kind of showed here. Good. Okay, so generations, depending on it's all looks like it's all temperature bound, okay, regions. So if it is a cold region, they have 1 generation. If they are in a warmer region, that's where they're developing, they have up to 3 generations per year. So I tend to say there are 2 to 3 generations per year. That's what we know. And the duration also is also subject to temperature, because their insects are their growth is susceptible to temperature. The warmer they grow faster, and that's how it is. So what we know about 50 to 75 days. In lab studies, they found about 83 days. So they also like kind of a stable temperature, like 27. That's close to, I would say, 80 degrees. That's what they like. Kind of to really do well. But if the temperature goes up, they are not great. They won't do well. If it goes 90, probably it may not do well. Again, all these things, all these studies are what I'm talking about is coming from labs type studies. So that's always a pinch of salt we need to have with the type of studies, because in the field situation, things can be different. Why this is important, why we are making this presentation in the first place, is because of this reason. If you look at the host range, it is very broad. They can go after like about 300 host plant species, and about spanning about 91 distinct families of of plants, and so many genera. You can read that here, and they can attack ornamental plants, trees in the forest. Most importantly, Brett will talk about the tree orchards, tree fruits, persimmons and apples, peaches, and all susceptible. So I'll just leave it there because let Brett talk about that. So the broad and very wide host range. That's why we thought it's very important to tell you this because they can survive in a various conditions. Like for example, if it's nursery, you might spray, but they can survive in the neighboring woodland and all those places on different hosts, and they can come back and attack back to back, right? And that's why this is important to know about this pest and their biology. So that includes herbaceous plants like ferns and grasses too, and woody ornamentals. So woody ornamentals and herbaceous plants kind of all has a good role to play here because they can attack all those plants. Damage. So I kind of talked about it a little bit on the beginning about the sooty mold and the honeydew and those things right in the beginning. That's very characteristic of any insect that feeds on the vine. That they eat more than they need, and they just secrete it, and that's what happens. They secrete it on the leaf tissue, stem, and all those places, and where this fungus basically grows, and that's the economic damage. And because growers' standpoint is very difficult because quality goes down and they cannot sell it. But for our landscape situation, it is also not good because that coat and that interferes with their ability to utilize the sunlight and grow, right? So photosynthesis will be reduced and it can cause all those damage. So in general, because of all these things, it can cause damage like yellowing, wilting, lack of vigor, and all those things. We haven't seen anything in our state to really talk about this. So these are the things that we know from what is reported. Another type of damage happens when they lay eggs, because when they lay eggs, they basically damage the tissue, and sometimes that twig dries out. So dieback of the twigs, and that is a kind of real problem. I think that's more important in nursery situations in our system here. Monitoring is very important. Right now, we don't have any particular tool because it's such a new pest. But what we know from the literature in South Korea and also in Japan and also in China, we don't have much grip on that either, because what they looked at few things, visual, chemical, vibrational tools, tried to develop a trap out of it, and they couldn't. So we don't have anything right now. But what we know is visually, if you see it, you can report it. And I think some of the methods, that's how this pest, came to light based on I naturalist picture. Somebody took a picture. So it looks like social media and all those things are going to be very, very important in terms of monitoring for this pest. So visual surveys, that's the main way it looks like it's going to happen. There are reports that light trap works because they have some attraction towards light. So that could be something that could be developed, but still we don't have that in place at this moment. Okay, so we are basically relied on our visual surveys. That's what's going on. And if you see detect it, report to your county agent, immediately, and also they will let the Department of Ag know that's already cited and is present. Okay. Management wise, well, what is in the literature is basically sanitation, because the idea is to cut and prune all those twigs when you see these egg masses, as you can see over here. That'll reduce the pressure, reduce the numbers, right? That's the goal. That's one method, sanitation, pruning, and we can suppress the population that way. Another way is that, especially in orchards, is basically grow them in a semi-open spaces, because they tend to go in shaded areas and lay eggs. So if you do it in open spaces where there's full sunlight, tend to have less damage or less infestation. Biological control is too early to talk about it because we don't know anything in our system. But what we know is that there are a bunch of predators in a native range that they go after. But again, this is all sheer number, right? If the pest numbers is so high, the predator numbers may not be there to catch up with that and keep the population down. That's a reality. So, but in a system, in a natural system, we need to work on all those things. In our system, we don't know that yet. So we are something that we are interested to work in the future if this problem continues. And there is also a couple of egg parasitoids reported in the literature. So that is something that good to know for us as this problem, if that becomes a problem here in Georgia. With regard to management wise, there are some insecticides reported. That's primary way of management right now in Asia. Like neonicotinoids like imidacloprid and pyrethroids like bifenthrin, permethrin, all those insecticides typically will do a good job. Looks like it based on the literature that we are seeing. Bimectin is another product. Is good at mites and those kind of those kind of insects. Arthropods. It will do well on this pest as well. Oils are also good. Looks like it. It's also reports, but there are also reports that saying that egg masses has this so many waxy substance there that basically difficult to penetrate with oil. So that is also there in the literature. So these are different options we have for managing this pest. And I will just call myself off on this. And Brett can go ahead. Stop share and save your questions towards the end, okay? So Brett and I can address your questions towards the end when Brett finishes his talk.
Did you say we could ask a question now or later? I couldn't.
I would say just wait and let Brett finish his talk as well. Thank you.
All right, sure.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. Well, thank you, Shimat. That's the great introduction. But so I'm going to talk about the brown winged planthopper as well. But first, just to introduce that we do also have two blogs that focus on fruiting crops in the state of Georgia, the UGA Peach blog, and then our viticulture blog. And so these are geared mainly towards our commercial producers, but they can be helpful for homeowners and master gardeners as well, because they do talk about at least activity of some of our main pests that do show up in Georgia. In terms of our pests, so the first thing I want to do is talk about the spotted lanternfly. All right, so this is another plant hopper that is invasive, and this whole webinar is really geared around the brown winged planthopper because of its new discovery here in Georgia. But I wanted to also remind everyone that we do have this other invasive planthopper here, the spotted lanternfly. So when we're out there looking for issues, we got to keep our eyes peeled for two things now. So I'm going to start off with a bit about the spotted lanternfly, and then I'm going to end with the brown winged planthopper, mostly to give another kind of push about this insect, kind of reiterating some of the things that Shimat has talked about. So some of it will be redundant, but it's really just to make sure that we get that point home that we do have a new pest here that could become a big problem. All right, so spotted lanternfly. So again, like I mentioned, this is another non-native invasive plant hopper that has arrived in Georgia. It is originally from East Asia, from a similar area as the brown-winged planthopper, but the spotted lanternfly had a larger native range. But instead of finding it first here in Georgia, it was first found in Pennsylvania back in 2014 and has quickly spread across the East Coast. And then down in 2024 was first found in Georgia in Fulton County. It hasn't spread very far since 2024, thankfully, but it's now found as well as in DeKalb County. So right now in Georgia, it's only in 2 counties. The populations haven't gotten too big, but they are found in surrounding states, including Tennessee and in South Carolina, just outside of Clemson and in Greenville. And so there's still potential not only for this insect to spread from within Georgia, but also to come back into Georgia or to come to Georgia from other places. And I'll talk about how that can happen in just a little bit. So the spotted lanternfly, unlike the brown winged planthopper, which could potentially have multiple generations, the spotted lanternfly appears to only have one generation, even here in Georgia. It starts off as the eggs, which are laid in the fall, and then that following spring, they hatch and become these first instar nymphs, these little black and white nymphs, which develop over a few weeks, become the second instars, third instars, which also look just like the brown winged planthopper. Those instars look very similar to the other ones. They just kind of get a little bit bigger. But then the fourth instars really kind of make this magical change and have a red color. They're much bigger with red background and then so have black and white dots. And then from there, they become these adults late summer. They will mate and lay their eggs. They overwinter as the eggs. Those eggs are laid in the fall. And then that cycle continues. And so when looking at the eggs, these are going to be the first things that we can probably encounter if we're looking in the fall. They're laid in these just about an inch long row of segmented eggs. So all these little things that look like rice, almost like shriveled up brown rice, are eggs. And they're not normally like this. They're usually covered up in this waxy layer. But under that, they can have about 60 eggs per egg mass. And that waxy layer starts off nice bright white, which stands out. It's like, all right, that's really easy to see. But as it becomes weathered and old, it actually becomes more camouflage. It blends better into that bark. And actually, on one of its main hosts, the Tree of Heaven, this camouflage looks really good. Blends in and makes it pretty difficult to see once they're overwintering. But what's weird about them is that they can lay their eggs basically on anything. They can be fence posts, it can be burn barrels, trellis poles, container cars, anything you can think of, they'll lay their eggs on it, which is really bizarre for an insect because a lot of female insects, when they're laying their eggs, they choose the actual host that their offspring are going to feed on, which makes sense. You'd want your babies to be born on their food, right? So to give them the best chance of survival. But really here, they're just laying their eggs wherever they can, and their nymphs are very mobile. They're really good at hopping and walking, and so they can find the host that they're looking for. So whether this is to reduce competition or whatnot, unfortunately, they're not going to be necessarily laying their eggs right on their host. It could be somewhere nearby, and then the nymphs will move and find that host on their own. So just some more pictures of these egg masses on various things. So on their host, but it can be on benches, poles, and trees. Actually, here's one on a grapevine, a trellis pole. They can be anywhere, which is just kind of cool, but also just really bizarre. All right, and then so a lot of those egg masses, they'll look nice and picturesque, like we showed, just that brownish tan covered up, but we don't always necessarily find them that way in the field. Here's one where the waxy layer has been uncovered, showing those segmented eggs there. Here's one that's partially covered with those eggs pointing out. The covered ones that would kind of typically would see, and then the weathering where the eggs are starting to poke through. But what's interesting here is that if you're looking for these egg masses or find something that looks like a mud blotch on a bench or on a tree, this is very common. I've had people actually find mud that got splattered on a tree and thought it was an egg mass, but you can actually kind of brush away that waxy layer. And if you start to see these eggs, that is a really good indicator that is going to be something like spotted lanternfly egg mass. But if you brush it away and there's nothing underneath, then good. There's nothing there. It's not an egg mass. So that's one thing I recommend. If you think you found something that looks like this, take a picture so you have a reference, but then kind of brush it away and see what's underneath. So in the spring, those egg masses will begin to hatch and the nymphs will come out. The first ones are really tiny, about a 1/4 inch long. They can be confused with things like ticks or other tiny little bugs. But unlike ticks, these things can hop really well. They're very good jumpers. These legs are designed really to be hoppers, hence their name plant hopper. And so ticks aren't going to jump away from you, but these plant hoppers will. The second and third instars, seconds and thirds, both again look like that first instar, black with the white dots, and then that fourth instar, they get a little bit bigger, about 3/4 of an inch, and those will be the red with that black and then the white dots as well. And then that fifth instar, or sorry, not fifth instar, from that fourth instar, they become the adults. Um, with their wings together, they're about an inch long, which makes them quite big for a plant hopper. I'm just showing next here, this is one of our sharpshooters, which is another type of leaf hopper. This is one of our big issues in grape production because it can spread Pierce's disease. So this is the glassy wing sharpshooter, and next to it is the hirsute sharpshooter. Both of these can transmit Pierce's disease. Now, what I'm really just showing here is how big the spotted lanternfly is compared to these other pests that we normally see in grape production. So they really do stand out, and they're really big compared to these. However, no one has documented that they can spread Pierce's disease to grapes in the field, so that's good. Right now, their main damage is from their feeding in terms of stress, which I'll talk about in a second as well. Just to show the male versus female, the females really are the ones that are going to be causing the most damage because they're the ones that can lay the eggs, which then will lead to more lanternflies in the future. But they have these yellow abdomens, which become more distinctive as they become gravid or filled with eggs. So as they have their eggs develop, the abdomens get bigger, and these yellow areas become more prominent with the black scales here. And the females have these red plates at the tip. They're part of their ovipositor where they're laying their eggs. The males do not have this. The males are also just generally smaller, especially when the females are full of eggs. When they get plumped up, they become much bigger than those males. And just anecdotally, as the females really get ready to lay their eggs, they can't fly very well because they're just really fat and heavy. Which also might explain why they lay their eggs wherever they can. It's because they really just can't move too far to find a good spot. All right, so when looking for the lanternflies, out in the wild, if you had all these insects right next to each other, they're pretty obviously different. But when you're just out there and something pops across your point of view, they can be a little bit confusing. So I just want to point out some of the common lookalikes of spotted lanternfly. So spotted lanternfly, when they're at rest, they have their wings over their abdomen, kind of like a tent shaped, which is very similar to our cicadas. They are related to cicadas, have very similar lifestyle in terms of their feeding, and the way that their wings are at rest. And so, even though cicadas are generally much bigger than the lanternflies, just that body shape can make them kind of confusing and look a lot like the lanternflies. Similarly with the leopard moths are moths, they're lepidopterans, so they're not plant hoppers like the spotted lanternfly. But with those spots on the wings here, and the way that they have their wings laid out is very similar to the lanternfly, so that can be confusing. And then the milkweed bugs here, they don't look like the adults so much, but they can look like those fourth instars with that red and black. And we also have, not shown here, are the box elder bugs, which will also look a lot like the milkweed bugs. That black and red and some white on the box elder bugs make them look really similar to the lanternflies. And they're both true bugs, so they also have that piercing, sucking mouth part. So that can also be confusing, especially if you don't have them right next to each other. Things like tiger moths and Ailanthus webworms and these sphinx moths all have some of the redness with some spots on their wings, and so those can also be confusing in the wild. And so I recommend, even if you see one of these and you think it is a spotted lanternfly, take a picture, try to capture it, whatever. It's always worth checking just in case.
Discount for cash.
Yes, sir.
All right, so how do they get to new places? How do they get to Georgia?
Do you have a
Well,
stamp?
they can move quite a bit on their own. Sorry, Andy, I'm gonna mute you there. They can get to new places on their own and move up to 4 miles, which is amazing for such a small little insect. 4 miles in their lifetime is impressive, but that wouldn't explain how they can get all the way up from Pennsylvania down to Georgia. And really what it comes down to is they're very good hitchhikers. They are being moved by human movement as well. Transportation on train cars, on actual cars or trucks, getting onto people's stuff. So one big concern here is if someone goes camping up in Pennsylvania where they have a huge infestation, they leave their camping chair out overnight in the fall. It's beautiful weather. Unfortunately, those lanternflies could be out there laying their eggs. And if you're not looking close enough, you're say, "Oh shoot, I got some mud on my chair. That's okay. I'm gonna take it back to Georgia, wash it off when I get home." Well, unfortunately, if those are actual egg masses, you get back, forget about it. Next spring, those egg masses hatch, lanternflies get out, and they can spread that way. So they're really good hitchhikers. They're moving across the country via our own transportation. So it's something we need to keep a lookout, especially if we go to areas where infestations are already high. And their hosts. So this is the main reason I'm talking about this is because they do have this huge host range, including things that are economically important for Georgia. They'll feed on things from vines to trees with over 100 different host species. They'll feed on basically anything from corn, soybean, basil, cucumber, and grasses. But fortunately, a lot of these things are just the nymphs. So the nymphs will be moving from host to host looking for something good to feed on, usually looking for tree of heaven. And so as they're moving from host to host or doing minimal damage, they're just getting enough of the nutrition in order to give them enough energy to move to that new host. So they're really not causing a lot of issue here. It's really when they're getting to their preferred host. So there are things like roses and walnut, birch, willow, sumac, and maples. They can do considerable damage because these are hosts that they really like. And then their two favorite hosts seem to be tree of heaven and grapes. So once they get to these are the ones we're really concerned for of actually doing damage. Tree of heaven, not so much because it is another invasive species. So damage there is not an issue, but if they're feeding on grapes, that can cause a lot of problems for us. So just a quick introduction to tree of heaven. As master gardeners, you probably have a better understanding of plants than I do. I'm an insect guy, but just to give you an idea of what the favorite host is, so we can keep a lookout. This is an invasive tree from China. It's been here for a couple hundred years now. They are relatively long-lived trees, and they can get quite big if unmanaged. So they have rapid growth, get up to 80 feet, and something like this can provide resources for a lot of our bugs, including Spotted Lanternfly, as well as the Brown Winged Planthopper. They do have male and female plants. So the males we can consider not as bad because they aren't going to be the reproducing, but the female ones will produce a lot of the sumera, the seeds, and that can readily spread. One way to identify these from other plants is that these heart-shaped leaf scars. So this is one thing that I use to distinguish this from sumac. I find a lot of sumac and a lot of black walnut out there. That confuses me, but if I can get close enough, I can look at these leaf scars and identify the tree of heaven that way. The bark is smooth, and that also allows those egg masses to kind of blend in. The leaves are pinnately compound here. They can be 1 to 4 feet long with about 10 to 41 leaflets, depending on the age of those leaves. And then at the base of each of those leaves is a little gland. And this is another way to determine if this sumac or tree of heaven is if that smells bad. You can smell that gland or smell their flowers, and they smell kind of like rancid peanut butter. This is from the literature. To me, it just smells kind of off. It does have a little nutty smell, but I don't know about rancid peanut butter. But to each his own in terms of smell, but it definitely does not smell good. Those sumera, those fruits here, are kind of like pinkish orange. Each one has a single seed. These are often found in the fall and can persist through the winter, but this is the best way for them to spread. And then just to show you that tree of heaven versus the sumac, the seed pods here versus the tree of heaven. And then just to show those leaves do look very similar, especially from a distance. All right, last little bit about tree of heaven. This is really when they find Spotted Lanternfly at a new area. It's generally found on tree of heaven. So in Fulton County, it was a tree of heaven basically patch where they first found Spotted Lanternfly. Same thing for outside of Clemson and in Greenville. It was on the tree of heaven in these areas where they first found Spotted Lanternfly. So this is a really good tool for monitoring. If you know where some tree of heaven is, you can use that as a way to see whether or not Spotted Lanternfly could be in that area. Those young instars tend to feed on whatever's around, but the fourth instars and those adults tend to move towards the tree of heaven and eventually might move towards things like grapes. And anything that or these lanternflies seem to need to feed on tree of heaven because the ones that do better. They are healthier, they can produce more eggs, and they live longer. So tree of heaven seems to be a very important part of their diet. However, they can feed on other things like grapes. So even if there's no tree of heaven, we still should be looking for it. And like I mentioned, late in the season, the adults seem to then move from the tree of heaven to grapes, and they can move back and forth. And like Shimat mentioned about the brown winged planthopper, having these wild hosts like tree of heaven in the forest borders allow populations to build up and move back and forth between our crops. All right, the damage, like brown winged planthopper, they can feed on the phloem and xylem of plants, which causes considerable stress to those plants. Generally doesn't cause death to a lot of our ornamentals or forest plants, but it has been associated with death of tree of heaven, which is good, but also black walnut saplings, which is bad, and then grapevines, which is real bad. So having all these planthoppers feeding on a single vine can considerably stress it out and eventually kill it. But it also can reduce the crop yield, reduce the fruit quality of those grapes that they're feeding on because they're reducing the nutritional transportation in that vine. And then if they get harvested and these lanternflies fall into the grapes while being harvested and then get crushed during the wine making, can also taint the wine. So that's just a whole another like kicking you when you're down. You're ruining the grapes, you're making the vines die, and then you ruin the wine. So these guys are really mean when it comes to wine production. And then that sooty mold growth, which will grow due to that honeydew secretion. Not only is it ugly if you're producing a nice, beautiful vineyard, it also can reduce the photosynthetic ability of those leaves. So it's another really jerk thing for these lanternflies. All right, so if we're out there looking for them, those nymphs are going to be out in the early spring. So this is from Penn State. So this is really Pennsylvania. This is something we need to figure out better once the populations get larger here in Georgia. But based on what they found in Pennsylvania, early on in the season, the nymphs are going to be on our perennials or on the new growth, things like on roses, but as well as grapes and tree of heaven. So the nymphs, as well as the adults throughout the season, can be on grape and tree of heaven. But in terms of some of our other plants like birch and willow, it's not until later in the season that those larger nymphs will start to move to these bigger trees. And then the adults will feed on those as well. In terms of management, the first thing, kind of what I was got to before, is try not to move spotted lanternfly. If we are going to areas that we know they're infested, check to make sure that we're not bringing them back to Georgia. So don't move any life stage any time of the year. If you're looking for them out in the field, you can scrape those egg masses if you find them. If you see any of those mud-like things, scrape them off, destroy them. You can spray eggs with dormant oil. Dormant oil doesn't work so well with the brown winged planthopper eggs, but if they do work well with the spotted lanternfly, you get a nice coating across that waxy layer. It can still suffocate the eggs and kill them before they hatch. So circle traps. So Penn State has some information at their website how to design these traps that can help catch them, especially the nymphs as they're moving. But we also have insecticides that can work against the nymphs as well as the adults. You can use contact as well as systemic ones like imidacloprid and dinotefuran. So spraying them at different times can basically get the whole season to help manage those nymphs and adults. And just to talk about those insecticides for a bit, we have a lot of things that kill them, from contact insecticides like the pyrethroids, as well as the systemic like the neonicotinoids. But there's insecticidal soaps in Bavaria, Bassiana that can also work. So we have some organic options as well. One thing to note here, though, is these bolded ones are the only ones that are currently labeled for use. So these are the legal ones to use for spotted lanternfly. But this is partially because spotted lanternfly is still relatively new. The chemical companies are still working to get these other insecticides labeled. So right now, we don't even have to worry because they're not a huge issue here in Georgia. but we do have options, and as it becomes more of an issue, we will get more options in the future. All right, so that's it for Spotted Lanternfly. Now I just want to kind of bring back home the message about Brown Winged Planthopper and compare it a little bit to that Spotted Lanternfly. I just have a few slides to cover here. So it's a little bit redundant, as I mentioned before, so I apologize about that, but I really just want to get this message home that this thing is here and that we need to look for it. All right, so it is another non-native invasive plant hopper. It is actually similar size to lanternflies. These are still relatively small. The body is pretty little, but those wings, especially when they're laid out like this image here, make them look a lot bigger than they are in real life. Same thing with the lanternflies. They make them look real big here, but when their wings are back, they're only about 1.5 centimeters long. So they make them look real big, but they're pretty small in the wild. Also from Southeastern Asia, but was first discovered here in Georgia in 2025 in Gwinnett County. Like Shimat mentioned, they discovered a couple more sites in 2026, which is why we're getting more concerned and why we're here today to talk about this, because it is seemingly to spread across Georgia. But so far, only in Gwinnett County. And just to show a few more pictures here, these are the light brown plant hoppers with these spots on their wings. The eggs are laid in the branches. So unlike the lanternflies, which are laid on the surface and then covered with a waxy layer, here they actually inject the eggs into the branch. So this is a cross section of the branch here. This is the branch. The eggs are actually inside, and then over that, they're covered with a waxy layer. These kind of like waxy filaments that almost look like mold, but are a protective cover for those eggs. The nymphs are kind of creamy, white colored. Will have these clusters of waxy filaments as well at the tip of their abdomen. Almost makes them look like little peacocks. I think they're quite cute. If they weren't so problematic, they would be great looking. But it's very distinctive to see that these little waxy blobs on a plant. They do have the 5 instars. Like Shimat was saying, they kind of just get bigger and bigger as they grow up to become those adults. So we're not really sure what's going to happen here in Georgia, but in other parts of the world, they can have 2 to 3 generations per season. And so having several, almost 100 eggs per female, these populations can get really big really fast. So this is another concern that we're going to keep an eye on, is how many generations, how quickly can they get out of control. The damage is really why we're concerned, because not only can they impact these 300 plants that involve agricultural crops, which is where I come in, things like grapes, just like Spotted Lanternfly, they'll feed on, the brown winged planthopper will feed on grapes. They'll also feed on blueberries. Apples are a big host that they found in Asia, as well as peaches. And so a lot of our big crops that we grow here in Georgia could be impacted by the brown winged planthopper. They'll also feed on ornamentals, like Shimat mentioned, and the forest species. So they can survive in the forest on a lot of things that grow here in Georgia, including the tree of heaven, just like a spotted lanternfly. So we can build up populations in those forest borders, which then could potentially move into the homes. It could move into our crops industries and just continue to cause issues. So that's something we're looking at as well. The damage comes from a variety of reasons. That sap depletion, basically stressing the plants. If you get a bunch of these feeding on one plant, you're reducing the nutrition within that plant. So if you're a fruit crop, it can reduce the fruit nutrition, the quality of that fruit. If it's on a grape, you might be reducing the quality of the wine. In some plants like apples, it can cause fruit drop. So it's really going to be a problem having that stress. But also from the egg laying, here showing the eggs being deposited into that branch. Here's covered with that waxy layer. You can see it's already becoming brown. It can kill those new growth, branches, which then could also lead to the loss of fruiting wood. And obviously, loss of fruiting wood is going to reduce the crop yield. And so this can be a huge issue. So not only are the plants being stressed, but you're also using or losing the fruit making parts of those plants. And then, of course, that honeydew, which can then lead to sooty mold, which makes the plants unsightly, but also potentially reducing the photosynthetic ability. So there's several ways that can cause damage, and none of them are good. All right, management, just quickly. Similar to the spotted lanternfly, we don't really have anything that's labeled for use in America for management of the brown winged planthopper. But as Shimat mentioned, there's other studies across the world that have looked at this and found that abamectin, imidacloprid, and the pyrethroids all have efficacy against reducing these, which is nice. It's imidacloprid, which also works against spotted lanternfly, and the pyrethroids that can help suppress them will also work against this. So I think this is encouraging, even though they're not labeled here and we don't need them here yet, knock on wood. It's encouraging to know that if we did have an issue, that there are things that we could potentially use. And we can, having better understanding of timing could also improve it. So the nymphs are going to be more vulnerable to our insecticides. So applying them when the nymphs are active will help. So we need to do a bit more work here in Georgia, which Shimat and I are actually actively trying to get some money to help support this, is to figure out better the phenology, the distribution, which will help us lead to better timing for management. But there's been a lot of work done, I don't say a lot of work, but work done elsewhere, and have determined that you can come up with thresholds. So that's really great. So some work on persimmon has showed that if they have about 5 to 6 egg masses per new branch, that's an indication that you do need to apply an insecticide, which actually that's a lot more damage than I would have expected. So I think that's encouraging as well, is that not only can they come up with a threshold for this crop, that the damage actually isn't as bad as I would have anticipated. And so for things like grapes and apples and peaches, we might be able to do that here as well once the problem arises. All right, so last slide, should we panic? All right, I'm throwing all this information at you, and I was like drinking from a fire hose. And part of it is to try to scare you, but really, should you panic? And I'm just saying simply no. We're here to get you alerted to this issue, but I don't want anyone going home scared. But really what I want you to do is keep an eye out for these things. If you do spot a spotted lanternfly, we can report it. The Department of Ag has this website. You can go on there and show where you found it. You can upload pictures. Similar with the brown winged planthopper, they don't have a website yet because it's so new, but they do. The Department of Ag would like you to email them. And we also have the ed maps through the UGA. You can also upload images there, and somebody will check to see if it is one of these invasives. And of course, you could also, and it'd be great if you could reach out to me if you have any concerns about finding them. And like Shimat mentioned, go to your extension agents. They will be your really first line of information for new issues like this. And so that's all I have. I can turn it back over, or we can open it up to any questions from the group.
Thank you both so much for your time and sharing all of this information with us. We really appreciate it. I put a link in the chat just now for the self-reporting for the spotted lanternfly. And then there are a few questions already in the chat. The one that I'm seeing that may not have been answered already was about lookalikes and if they are invasive as well.
Yes, that is a great question. And so from the lookalikes that I posted, they are not. These are things that we would naturally see. And so we all have things that could potentially be looks like. I'm trying to think of things that would look alike that are invasive. Spongy moth I didn't put on there, but that kind of looks like the leopard moth. And it's white with spots. So that one is an invasive species. So there are things that could look like that. But the ones that we posted or I posted are ones that we should naturally see.
All right, and for anybody else who has questions, feel free to type those in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourselves at this point and ask away.
Hi, I got a question for you. I took a photo of something and submitted it to iNaturalist, and it identified it as mealybugs, but it looked like your pictures on the stems of a lantana. It looked like a little white flaky adherences along the stems. Does do mealybug larvae look like that, or pupae, or whatever they are?
Yeah, so mealybugs are another type of true bug. They are a different group than the plant hoppers, but they are characteristically covered with a waxy coating as well. And so depending on, there's a bunch of different species of mealybugs. So depending on that one that you saw could look very similar in appearance to the brown winged plant hopper nymphs. Um, Shimat might better know because I know there's a lot more mealybugs that attack ornamentals and nursery crops.
Yeah, well, here's my point. I will do more research and submit something to you if if it leads toward what you guys are looking for.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the best thing to do.
All right, great. Thank you.
There is a question in the chat from Gina, and she's asking if we have any of the natural predators of these invasive insects.
not that well. So we don't know exactly what is going to feed on them here yet. So that's another thing that we're going to look at to evaluate what will feed on them. But we do have natural enemies and predators that are generalist predators. So things like lady beetles or lacewing, um, uh, minute pirate bugs. These things are generalist predators that will feed on small arthropods. And so there is a really good chance that these will feed on our or are on the brown winged plant hoppers, but we don't know that the rate of their feeding or whether or not these are going to be predators that can do enough feeding to keep their populations low. There are things like parasitic wasps, little parasitoids, that generally are a little bit more effective at keeping populations low because they are often more specialized. And those are ones that are things that we'll need to look at in more detail to see if we have ones that might work against the ones here. Because I think Shimat pointed out there's a Telenomus genus that will attack them in their native range, and we have several Telenomus species here in Georgia, and so there might be some that will also work against the brown winged plant hopper.
All right, and then there is a question from John as well, and he's asking if either of these insects are a problem for the vegetable garden.
So the spotted lanternfly will likely not be an issue for your vegetable garden. You might get the nymphs feeding on them just a little bit as they're passing through if the populations are really high in that area. Otherwise, unlikely that they'll even feed on them. The brown winged plant hopper, that is another one that we're not really sure of. Because of its large host range, there is a chance. But unfortunately, I'd like to say no, but we don't really know at this point.
All right, any other questions? Oh, I do see a question here in the chat from Nancy, and she's saying one of the first slides say that the brown winged plant hopper was first found in Oakwood, but you guys said it was found in Gwinnett County. So I guess she's just asking for clarification on where it first appeared.
That's a good question. I think I don't have a whole lot to answer to this question, but thing is that this is how the Department of Ag came to us and told us Oakwood. And my understanding is that they're talking about the woods that have oak trees in there. That's what they're referring to because they found on the found on the oaks. And that's what they're referring to, not the place name. That's what I'm thinking because the detection happened in Gwinnett County, not in other county at this point. So that is very clear.
Okay,
So
got
so I
it.
assume that's coming from oak trees. That's what they're finding. That's what they're referring to. That's how I've had it oak wood, like oaks in the woods. That's kind of idea.
the wood of oak trees, not
That's
the
right.
place of Oakwood, which is in another county in Georgia. Got it. And then we have a question from Maria that's actually for me. She's asking how they report this presentation. So you guys as master gardeners, you will log your time spent today being a part of this presentation as continuing education. So you will log that in MG log. You'll log in and enter the time under your continuing education list.
Hey, Brett, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, on what?
Oh, okay. So just asking how we report this. So we have a system of reporting. We call it elements. That's what we call it. And we go there and report, right, Brett? About extension talks and how many hours you spend here, like an hour here. That's how
But
we do. And I
sorry,
think,
Shimat, that was for Sarah, wasn't it? The question.
Yeah, the master gardeners will be
oh, okay, it
reporting
was fun.
this in their separate record keeping system. But we will treat this like a thoughtful Thursday session, and we can certainly do an entry for you guys, or if you go and enter it yourselves and you just need the number of views from the recorded session or the number of participants from this live session, we can send you all those details as well. The master gardeners log things a couple of different ways, so I'm sure they just wanted to make sure they entered it correctly.
Sorry to confuse you all.
No worries. Yes, John is asking if this is going to be in MG log for further use. Yes, this is recorded. I'm going to put it in MG log just like we do our other monthly sessions, and so you'll see it on the homepage later today. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions come in at this time. Certainly do email any of us if you guys have any questions that come up, or if anyone in your county is asking questions. If you get out there and see things and you're not really sure what it is, certainly do as was advised, take pictures, reach out and report, check in with your extension agents. The extension agents will also have access to this recording. I'm sure they will find that helpful as well. And with that, we will go ahead and close out this session. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Shimat. Thank you so much for making the time today to give us this important update and all of these details that are really valuable. And I know everyone is going to be keeping their eyes peeled when they're out in their landscape. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great afternoon. And we will see you again for our next talk in July. We will have a Thoughtful Thursday session on some conservation efforts. So you guys get lots of emails from me, so you'll be hearing from me. Otherwise, everyone take care and have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.